How to get the data from internet in JavaScript. Today we will be talking about fetch, promise, and async await. All these topics are large and actually on the YouTube you can learn them independently. So I remember when I learned them independently, I really had a lot of problems with combining them together. And now I think that you actually should learn them together to understand how modern programming works. So we will learn a lot of new theory. It will be difficult, so you need to practice a lot to actually understand these topics. But I will try to explain it as simple as possible. So at first, let's start with some console logs. I wrote 3 console logs, and now we see the action 1, action 2, and action 3. So the data is not important. I want to show that these functions have a specific order. And this is how we used to write in our programming. So if I change the order of these logs in my code, I will see the result with the changed order, so I can control it easily. Then I want to get the list of users. So it will be similar to pets that we had in our game. So this is a list of objects. Here I want to get the same result, just instead of writing this list in our code myself, we have this URL, and if I connect to this URL, it will return me a list of users. So for that I have a built-in function fetch. And now let's log to the console our users to see the result. So, and instead of the list of users, you see a promise with the status pending. Function fetch needs some time before it returns the real data. So for example, console.log with the hard-coded string takes around 1 millisecond. Actually, even less, just let's say that it takes 1 millisecond. So it means that all these functions take 1 millisecond for execution. When our JavaScript starts the execution of the first console log, it sees that after 1 millisecond, we have the result. So and then we can go to the next console log until we get to the fetch function. So this function connects to the internet and it takes around 200 milliseconds before the data really arrive to our computer. So we know that JavaScript waits for 1 millisecond, and it means that when JavaScript wants to execute this line and set the result to the user's variable, it sees that, okay, after 1 millisecond, I don't have any response. So let's just go to the next line. And on the next line, we want to access the users, but we know that the user's value is still unknown. So instead of throwing an error, fetch function returns a promise with the status pending. So and eventually in our console log we see this promise. So it works in this way that this function takes around 200 milliseconds, and after 1 millisecond JavaScript wants to go to the next line. And to avoid the undefined value for our users, we have a promise object. It just means that the value will be somewhere in the future. Promises can have 3 different states. In the first state we have the pending. It means that the data will be somewhere in the future. Then we might have the fulfilled state. It means that the data have been arrived on your computer successfully. And we also have rejected, which means that we had some problem in the internet, so the data have not been arrived. Now let's write a simple timeout function that waits 1000 milliseconds, and after it, it logged to the console the same variable users. Now in the console you can see that we have the promise with the status fulfilled. So it means that if we access the same variable after 1 second, the data will be arrived on our computer and we can use it. But anyway, promises are just objects. They just show the state, like the data is arriving or the data have been arrived. The real data is inside of the promise, so we need to parse it. So at first, let's comment out our timeout, and then let's wrap our users into the function. I wrote a new function fetch users, and then I called it in our code. Again, you see that our promise is in the pending state. And now we know that this is because fetch takes time before the data will be arrived. So, but we actually want to wait until the data will be arrived, and then we want to extract it. And for solving this problem, we have async await. So at first, I need to write a sync keyword before the function. It will make my function asynchronous. And then inside of the async functions, I can call the keyword await. So and this keyword says to JavaScript that you must wait until the data will be arrived, and then you must extract this data. And now in our console you see that we actually have some kind of response. So this is an object that actually contains our data. So if you expand it, you will see that our body is a readable stem. So this is still not an array of users, and this is because the data from the internet is coming in small parts. So we will not talk a lot about it, just you need to know that it takes time before all the data will be arrived. And then you might think that readable stream is just a data type, the same as an array or a number, a string, and there is a specific algorithm how to get the JSON from the readable stream. We need to convert our readable stream into a string, and then we will be able to convert it into a JSON. So as you remember, JSON is just an object. So this is the same kind of object as we had in our game, just it has several limitations. For example, the values cannot be undefined. But for the simplicity, we can just say that JSON is a JavaScript object. So the JSON is a real data that we want to get, and this algorithm is always the same. So this is the reason why we have a built-in function to convert our readable stream directly to the JSON. For that I can write users.json and it will do exactly these two steps. So it will convert our stream into the string and then into the JSON. Here is still one problem. If you log it to the console, you will see that again we have a promise. So it means that parsing of our stream takes some time that is longer than 1 millisecond. And this is the reason why we need to write the await keyword. And now, if you look to the console, you will see that we have an array of objects. And if you expand it, you will see that this is an array of people. So we have the information like ID, name, then username, and so on. Now, the structure of this data is actually the same as we had in our game. And now there is no difference of working with this data that we manually write inside of our JavaScript file or this data that we fetched from the internet. For example, now I can write a for loop and then I can log to the console each person individually. So at first, let's declare a new user. So I see that my user JSON is an array, so it means that I can use square brackets with a specific index. For example, it can be 0, or I can write a dynamical value like I, and then I can log to the console each user. I also found that I forgot to write the length, so here I need to write the length. And now, if I save this file, you see that we have 10 individual users in our console. And as you see, they keep the order. So we see the user with ID 1, then the user with ID 2, and so on. So they keep the order. You might also ask why I haven't written the await keyword before the user JSON. Actually, you may write this keyword. So if you save this file, you will not see any changes, but await keyword affects only on promises. We know that our user JSON is an array. When we access a specific index, this is an object. So this is not a promise, and this is the reason why we don't need to add this await keyword. We also can say that it takes 1 millisecond for JavaScript to access an individual user. So with experience, you will understand much better when you need to write await keywords, just a simple rule. So let's remove the await keyword from the user's JSON, and then let's log to the console this variable. So every time when you see promise, especially with the status of pending, it means that somewhere you needed to write await keyword. I returned our await keyword back, and now let's also talk about the difference between synchronous and asynchronous functions. I want to take these console logs and then I will put them after the fetch users call. And now if I save this function, you will see that even though that I wrote our console logs after the user's fetch, in the console you see action 1, action 2, action 3, and only after that you see our users. And this is because console.log is a function that is synchronous. So it takes 1 millisecond, or let's just say very few time, to be executed. So JavaScript can do it immediately. The same with the rest of the logs. But the function fetch users is asynchronous. So it means that it takes some time before JavaScript can execute this function. And this is the reason why this is difficult to keep the order of asynchronous functions. I can say you a simple rule that works in 99%. If you call several functions, at first JavaScript executes the synchronous functions and only then it executes asynchronous functions. This is not a strict rule because actually it depends on the time of execution. So here we assume that this function takes 1 millisecond, but this function takes 300 milliseconds. And actually the time of execution is not fixed. So for example, in our fetch users function, in the first fetch it can be 200 milliseconds, but then in the second fetch it can be 210 milliseconds. And this is because internet a little bit random, so we don't know the exact path how our data is going to our computer. So and this is the reason why we can't say the exact fixed time, we can just calculate some kind of average. But a very simple rule that works in 99% is that at first the synchronous functions will be executed and then the async functions will be executed. And for keeping the order inside of async functions, you have the await keyword that actually waits until the data will be arrived and then it extracts the data, and only after that the next line that relies on this data will be executed. Now you learned a lot of theory about asynchronous functions, and actually you need to practice a lot to deepen your understanding of this topic. So in the next video, we will practice with async functions.